Have you ever been truly, utterly alone? I mean, not just physically isolated, but isolated in a way that the silence itself starts to hum with an unseen presence. Imagine a sprawling, multi-story office building, all glass and steel, completely deserted after dusk. The only lights are the emergency glows and the harsh blue luminance of your security monitors, reflecting faint, ghostly movements in their screens. The air is still, thick with the scent of stale carpet and old coffee, and every creak of the structure sounds amplified, echoing through empty corridors. This is the kind of story that makes you check your locks twice before going to bed. So before the story truly begins, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know your city and local time in the comments below, and if you've had a similar creepy encounter, share it below. Maybe your story will inspire the next one. Now lock the door and turn off the lights. Turn up the volume and pay attention. Maybe you're not as alone as you think. Our story begins now. My name is Mark, and for a solid 3 years, I worked the graveyard shift as a security guard for a massive corporate headquarters downtown. It was one of those impressive 20-story buildings, mostly empty at night, save for the hum of the HVAC system and the occasional low roar of the city outside. My job was straightforward. Check the cameras, patrol the floors, ensure all doors were locked, and write up the night shift reports. It was monotonous, sure, but I liked the solitude. There was a unique piece to being the sole waking soul in such a vast, usually bustling place. I'd bring a thermos of coffee, a book, and often just enjoy the quiet. Most nights nothing happened, absolutely nothing. It was just me, the silence, and the occasional mouse scuttling in the walls, or so I thought. The building itself was relatively new, maybe 15 years old, but it had a strange, almost cold aura about it. Architecturally, it was all sharp angles and reflective surfaces, designed to look cutting edge, but at night it just felt cavernous. My routine started on the ground floor, monitoring the bank of security monitors in the main lobby. There were nearly 100 cameras, covering every corner, every stairwell, every elevator bank. It was an overwhelming display of surveillance, yet somehow, it never felt truly secure when you were the only one watching. After an hour or so of monitor duty, I'd grab my flashlight and begin my rounds. I started at the top floor and worked my way down, checking doors, fire exits, and ensuring no unauthorized access. Usually, I'd only encounter a cleaning crew on the lower floors around 3 a.m., but for the most part, it was just me. The silence was so profound that my footsteps often sounded like thunderclaps on the polished marble floors. One of the quirks of the building was the 13th floor. For some reason, it was almost always completely dark. Even the emergency lights seemed dimmer there. The company had initially leased it out to a tech startup that went belly up after 6 months, and since then, it had remained largely unoccupied. Most of the offices were stripped bare, just empty cubicles and dusty desks. It was the only floor that genuinely gave me the creeps, even before things started. The air always felt heavier, colder, up there. I remember one night shift report where I noted a persistent flickering light in one of the abandoned office spaces on that floor. I wrote it off as faulty wiring or a dying bulb, common enough in such a large structure, but it was always that light on that floor. Every single night. It was an observation that seemed trivial at the time, just another item on the maintenance list, but it would later take on a much more sinister meaning. My first inkling that something was truly off came about 6 months into the job. I was on the 9th floor, doing my usual perimeter check. The building had these motion-activated lights in the hallways, so as I walked, sections of the hall would light up ahead of me, then click off behind me. It was like trailing a shadow of light. As I rounded a corner towards the fire exit, I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible thump. It sounded like something heavy had been dropped, maybe a floor above or below. I froze, listening intently. My heart started to beat a little faster, a primal alarm bell ringing deep in my chest. I strained my ears, but all I could hear was the distant hum of the building. Nothing else. No more thumps. I told myself it was probably the old building settling, or maybe a pipe bursting somewhere. These things happen. It was an old structure, prone to various creaks and groans. I shrugged it off, made a mental note to check the maintenance logs for any reports of strange noises, and continued my round. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the sound had come from somewhere inside the building, not from its mechanical guts. It felt deliberate. A few nights later, the anomalies grew slightly bolder. I was back in the security office, staring at the monitor bank. Everything was still, the cameras showing empty hallways and silent offices. Suddenly, on camera 47, which monitored the main corridor on the 15th floor, I saw it. Just for a split second, a shadow. It wasn't a person, not a cleaning crew, and definitely not me. It was too tall, too slender, and it moved with an unnatural fluidity that made my breath catch in my throat. It darted from one office doorway to another, almost too fast for me to register fully. My eyes immediately snapped to the screen, replaying the last 10 seconds, but it was gone. Nothing but an empty corridor. I leaned closer to the monitor, squinting, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the light, perhaps a natural shadow cast by the emergency exit signs playing on my tired eyes. It was late, I was alone, and I'd been staring at screens for hours. My mind was probably messing with me, exaggerating normal visual glitches into something more sinister. I even wiped the screen, as if a smudge might have caused the illusion. But deep down, I knew what I saw, or thought I saw, didn't fit. It was too distinct, too sharp-edged to be a simple trick of the light. The memory of that fleeting shape lingered, a cold prickle at the back of my neck. The vast, empty office building suddenly felt a lot less comforting and a lot more isolated. After that first ambiguous sighting, the subtle disturbances started to become less subtle, creating an unsettling pattern that gnawed at my composure. The quiet hum of the building, once a comfort, began to feel like a low thrum of anticipation, as if the very structure was holding its breath. I found myself hyper-aware, my senses on high alert, constantly scanning the monitor banks, straining to catch another glimpse of that impossible shadow. The rational part of my brain kept trying to dismiss it: fatigue, overactive imagination, sensor glitches, but the irrational part, the one that felt a cold knot in my stomach, knew better. My night shift reports grew longer, filled with increasingly vague observations that I couldn't quite bring myself to articulate fully. One particularly eerie night, I was patrolling the 11th floor. The lighting here was particularly dim, with several overhead tubes flickering intermittently, casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on the eyes. As I walked past a row of cubicles, I heard a sound that made me stop dead in my tracks. A faint, almost melodic whisper. It wasn't human speech, not exactly, but it possessed a cadence, like someone humming a tuneless, ancient lullaby just out of earshot. I stood there, utterly still, flashlight beams sweeping the empty cubicles, my heart hammering against my ribs. The sound seemed to emanate from deeper within the floor, perhaps from the deserted executive suites at the far end. My first thought was an intruder, which was terrifying enough. I reached for the radio on my belt, ready to call for backup, but then the sound changed. It became less like whispering and more like a series of soft, rhythmic clicks, like bones gently knocking together. It was a sound that didn't belong in an office building, a sound that felt utterly organic and deeply wrong. I slowly advanced, flashlight held steady, adrenaline coursing through me. I moved towards the source, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the profound silence. As I approached the large, glass-walled conference room, the clicking stopped. I peered through the glass, my beam cutting through the gloom, revealing only empty chairs and a polished table. Nothing. I checked the perimeter, the emergency exits, even the small kitchenette. Everything was secure, untouched. There was no one there, but the experience had been too vivid, too real to be dismissed as imagination. I distinctly remembered the way the air had grown perceptibly colder as I approached the sound, a chill that had nothing to do with the building's climate control. It was then I started to suspect that whatever was in the empty office building with me, it wasn't human. It was something else entirely. The flickering light on the 13th floor, the one I'd noted in my early night shift reports, became more insistent. It wasn't just flickering anymore. It was actively pulsing, growing brighter then dimmer, almost like a slow, deliberate breath. Every time I patrolled that floor, an unsettling dread would settle over me. I'd try to avoid it, take a different route, but eventually, my rounds demanded I check it. The air on the 13th floor always felt heavy, thick with an unseen presence, and the temperature would drop several degrees the moment I stepped out of the elevator. One night, as I approached the pulsing light, which emanated from an interior office with a frosted glass door, I heard another sound. This time it was unmistakably movement, a dragging sound like something heavy being pulled across the carpet, followed by a slight scrape. It was coming from inside that office. My breath hitched. I stood outside the frosted door, the light pulsing rhythmically through the glass, casting an eerie, reddish glow on the floor. I knew with absolute certainty that no one was supposed to be in that office. It had been empty for years. My hand instinctively went to my sidearm, a standard issue .38 revolver, mostly for show, I'd always believed. Now it felt woefully inadequate. I pressed my ear against the cool glass of the door, trying to discern more. The dragging stopped. The scrape didn't repeat. All I could hear was the pulsing rhythm of the light and my own ragged breathing. I slowly, carefully tried the doorknob. It was locked. Of course it was locked. I had locked it myself a week prior, per protocol for unoccupied spaces. Yet the sounds, the light, the cold, they were all too real. I even checked the small square peephole, but the frost on the glass obscured anything inside. I peered around the frame of the door, trying to see if there was any gap, any way to glimpse into the room. Nothing. The office was sealed, yet clearly occupied. The overwhelming sense of being watched was almost physical, pressing down on me. I debated breaking protocol, forcing the door open, but a deeper, more primitive fear held me back. What if I opened it? What would I find? The next couple of weeks were a blur of growing paranoia. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye, fleeting movements in the peripheral vision of the security monitors, shadows that danced where no shadow should be. I'd walk down a corridor, and a door that I had just checked and confirmed was closed would be slightly ajar when I turned back. It was never fully open, just a crack, enough to make me question my memory, enough to be ambiguous. Was I just tired? Was I imagining these things? The building was playing a psychological game with me. One night I was in the lobby, filling out my reports, and the main elevator, which required a keycard for access at night, suddenly chimed and opened. There was no one inside. It was empty. The lights within flickered, then it closed with a soft thud, only to spontaneously open again perhaps 30 seconds later. This happened 3 times before it finally stayed shut. It was as if something was mocking me, toying with me, letting me know it was there. I started taking longer routes, avoiding the 13th floor whenever possible, but the feeling of being watched intensified. Sometimes in the dead quiet, I would hear a faint echo, like a sigh or a soft, almost inaudible chuckle that seemed to drift down from the upper floors. It was always just enough to make me pause, just ambiguous enough to make me doubt myself, but always there. I felt like a rat in a maze, constantly feeling observed, constantly anticipating the next unnerving sound or sight. The emptiness of the building was no longer peaceful, it was oppressive, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that it was only a matter of time before whatever it was decided to stop playing games and reveal itself fully. My dread was palpable, a growing weight in my chest as I approached my next round. The very air seemed to thicken with unspoken threat, and I knew, instinctively, that my next patrol would be different, very different. The dread I carried into my next shift was a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders, making every step feel heavy. The once comforting silence of the empty office building was now a suffocating blanket, amplifying every creak, every distant hum. I couldn't shake the feeling that the game was over, that whatever had been toying with me was ready to reveal itself. I knew I had to go to the 13th floor. Protocol demanded it, and an unnerving compulsion, a desperate need to face the source of my torment, drew me there. I took the service elevator, preferring its utilitarian clang and shudder to the smoother, grander main lifts. As the doors opened onto the 13th floor, the air hit me like a physical wall of cold. It was bone-chilling, far colder than any air conditioning system could produce, and it carried a faint, metallic scent like old blood and ozone. The emergency lights were barely glowing, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe with their own life. My hand was on my 38 again, not for protection, but simply for the solid weight of it, a pathetic comfort. The pulsing light from that mysterious office was brighter tonight, a sickly, yellow-orange glow that seemed to beat in time with my own racing heart. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, and began my patrol, moving methodically, flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive gloom. Every office door I passed seemed to loom, every shadow seemed to stretch and shift. Then I heard it. Not a whisper, not a click, but a low, guttural gasp, followed by a soft, almost wet squelch. It was nearby, very nearby. It came from the office directly across the hall from the one with the pulsing light. My blood ran cold. This office, too, was supposed to be empty, locked, unused, but the door was now slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness visible within. My flashlight beam was shaking, but I forced myself to raise it, aiming it at the crack in the door. What I saw wasn't human. It was a silhouette, impossibly tall and slender, hunched over something on the floor. It appeared to have unnaturally long, spindly limbs, and its head was small, almost pin-like. The skin, or what I could glimpse of it, seemed leathery, almost chitinous, reflecting the dim light with a faint, oily sheen. It was moving, not with the fluid grace of the shadows on the monitor, but with a jerky, almost insectal motion. As I watched, mesmerized by a terror that rooted me to the spot, it slowly, deliberately, turned its head. It didn't have a face in the conventional sense. What I saw was a smooth, featureless expanse, but two pinpricks of light, like glowing embers, appeared where eyes should be. They fixed on me. And then slowly, a thin, almost invisible line appeared across its featureless surface, widening into a grin that stretched impossibly far, revealing not teeth, but a dark, gaping void. A choked scream caught in my throat. This was it. This was what haunted the night shift reports. This was the non-human thing that stalked the desolate floors. The sheer wrongness of it, the grotesque mockery of a face, the impossible height. It broke something in my rational mind. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my feet felt encased in concrete. The creature, if that's what it was, straightened up, slowly unfolding its impossibly long limbs. It took a single, deliberate step towards the door towards me. The movement was slow, deliberate, almost a taunt. I could hear a faint, scraping sound with each step, like talons dragging on the carpet. That's when the smell hit me, an overwhelming stench of decay and something metallic sharp, like a wound that had festered for too long. The pinprick eyes glowed brighter, and I felt as if something was physically pressing into my mind, trying to tear through my thoughts. I finally snapped out of my paralysis. I turned and ran, not thinking, just moving. I didn't look back. My legs pumped, taking the stairs two at a time, ignoring the calls for an elevator. I heard a sound then, a soft thump from behind me, followed by a series of rapid clicks that echoed down the stairwell, getting faster, closer. It sounded like it was running on all fours, scrambling down the concrete steps. The sound was terrifyingly agile, impossible for any human. I pushed myself harder, gasping for breath, the metallic smell filling my nostrils. The image of that impossible grin burned into my retinas. I burst out onto the ground floor, ignoring the security office, ignoring everything. My only thought was to get out, to reach the outside world, to find light and other people. I fumbled with the heavy, bolted lobby doors, my hands shaking so violently I could barely grab the handle. The clicks were right behind me now, echoing through the empty lobby, sounding as if they were just feet away. I could feel the cold radiating from it, an icy tendril seeking me out. With a surge of adrenaline, I finally wrenched the door open and stumbled out into the pre-dawn city street, gasping for air. The cold morning air felt like a balm, but the sounds of the city, the distant rumble of traffic, the early birdsong, did little to soothe the terror still coursing through my veins. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, didn't even look back at the looming glass structure. I drove away, leaving the empty office building and whatever was inside it behind me forever. I never went back. I left my keys, my uniform, my night shift reports, everything on the passenger seat and drove until the sun was fully up, never once checking my rearview mirror. It's been years since that night, but the memory, the sensation, remains like a cold splinter lodged deep in my psyche. I can still taste that metallic, decaying scent. I can still see those pinprick eyes, that impossible, gaping grin. Every shadow seems to hold a similar grotesque form. Every distant sound at night seems to echo those frantic clicks. I still work security, but never, ever the night shift. And I certainly never work alone. I've tried to rationalize what I saw, to dismiss it as a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and stress, but the visceral terror was too real, too absolute. There's no explaining away the chill that permeated the air, the specific, impossible movements, the sheer, undeniable wrongness of it. Sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet, I find myself staring into the darkness of my room, wondering about that office building. Is it still there? Is it still there? Waiting in the deep shadows of the 13th floor, patiently listening for the next solitary soul to step into its domain, ready to unfold its impossible limbs and fix its glowing, featureless gaze upon them. I still leave a light on sometimes, just a small one, because the darkness feels heavier now, no longer empty. And I know with a chilling certainty that some things are meant to be unknown, untouched, and utterly terrifying. Because what I saw wasn't just a monster, it was a violation of reality itself, a glimpse into a darkness that lingers, watching, waiting, even now.